Boys, where's your spirit? I don't hear no singing. When you were slaves, you sang like birds.
But I had filmed something, and when I saw it, I got scared.
In 1974, Hollywood executives made a decision that would haunt them for decades. They tried to destroy a comedy before audiences could see it.
Good morning, ma'am. And isn't it a lovely morning?
Up yours, nigger.
Launching threats, cover-ups, and desperate damage control. The movie survived, but the scandals were buried deep. Today, we're revealing the panic, the betrayals, and the dirty secrets that Hollywood hoped would stay hidden forever. This is the story of 21 shocking facts behind Blazing Saddles, the script that made executives flee Warner Brothers. Executives gathered in their boardroom to read Mel Brooks' script for the first time. Within minutes, they were sweating. By page 20, they were panicking. By the end, they were ready to bury the entire project. The script was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. It didn't just push boundaries, it obliterated them with a sledgehammer. Studio head John Calley reportedly threw the script across his office and declared it career suicide. Another executive was overheard saying, "This isn't a movie, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen." But here's where it gets interesting. Warner Brothers had already committed to the project. Brooks had leverage from his previous successes, and backing out would cost them millions. So they tried a different strategy: sabotage from within. They scheduled the test screening for the worst possible time slot, invited the most conservative audience they could find, and prepared for disaster. Instead, something miraculous happened. The audience laughed so hard that several people literally fell out of their seats. The applause lasted 4 minutes. One executive was caught on tape saying, "We've either created a masterpiece or destroyed the studio. There's no middle ground." The panic in his voice was unmistakable. They knew they had a monster on their hands. They just couldn't tell if it would make them rich or destroy them completely. The script had survived its first execution attempt, but the war was just beginning. Richard Pryor's genius betrayal. Richard Pryor was supposed to be the star of Blazing Saddles. He co-wrote the script, created the most controversial dialogue, and was Mel Brooks' first choice for the lead role of Black Bart. Then, in what appeared to be Hollywood racism, the studio crushed his dreams and cast Cleavon Little instead. That's the story everyone knows. Here's what really happened. Pryor didn't just lose the role, he orchestrated his own removal in one of the most brilliant power plays in Hollywood history. The comedian was struggling with drug addiction and erratic behavior that made him uninsurable. But instead of admitting weakness, he turned his liability into leverage. During script meetings, Pryor deliberately escalated his outrageous behavior. He showed up late, made impossible demands, and pushed the racial content to levels that terrified executives. When they finally told him he couldn't star in the film, Pryor had exactly what he wanted: full creative control over the script and a massive payday without the pressure of carrying the movie. The betrayal goes deeper. Pryor secretly negotiated to retain ownership of his most controversial dialogue. Every time someone quoted his lines, he collected royalties. When the film became a massive hit, Pryor earned more money from not starring in it than most actors made from their biggest roles. But the real genius move? Pryor leaked stories to the press about being rejected by racist Hollywood executives. The sympathy generated from this betrayal launched his stand-up career into the stratosphere and made him untouchable for future projects. Cleavon Little got the role, but Richard Pryor got the last laugh and the bigger paycheck. The day everything collapsed, February 7th, 1974, the day that nearly ended Blazing Saddles before it began. The cast and crew arrived on set that morning to find chaos. Overnight, someone had vandalized the entire Western town set with threatening graffiti. Equipment was sabotaged. Costumes were slashed. But the real shock came when they discovered who was behind it. It wasn't angry protesters or racist extremists. It was Warner Brothers' own security team, acting on orders from nervous executives who wanted the production shut down permanently. The studio had calculated that paying breach of contract penalties would be cheaper than the potential lawsuits and boycotts the film might generate. They staged the vandalism to create an excuse for cancellation, then called an emergency meeting with Mel Brooks. Brooks walked into that meeting knowing his career was on the line. The executives presented him with two options: drastically tone down the script or watch the project die. Brooks's response became Hollywood legend. Either you believe in this movie or you don't, but if you kill it now, I'll make sure every newspaper in America knows that Warner Brothers is too scared to release a Mel Brooks comedy. The room fell silent. The executives knew Brooks had them cornered. Killing the project would create exactly the kind of publicity nightmare they were trying to avoid. By 5 p.m. that day, the set was being rebuilt. The movie was back on track, but the war between Brooks and the studio had only just begun. The fart heard round the world. The campfire bean scene wasn't supposed to exist. It was born from desperation, filmed in secret, and nearly destroyed the movie's chances of ever seeing theaters. But it became the most talked about 30 seconds in comedy history. Here's what really happened behind the scenes. Mel Brooks was struggling with a dead spot in the script, a transition scene that felt flat and lifeless. During a late-night writing session, fueled by too much coffee and mounting pressure, Brooks scribbled down what he thought was a throwaway gag: cowboys eating beans around a campfire, followed by the inevitable biological consequences. The next morning, Brooks tried to throw the scene away. His co-writers convinced him to keep it as a backup. The studio executives never saw it in the official script. When filming day arrived, Brooks made a calculated gamble. He shot the safe version of the scene first, then dismissed most of the crew. With only essential personnel remaining, he filmed the bean sequence using his own money. The actors were mortified. Gene Wilder reportedly said, "Mel, this will end all of our careers." Cleveland Little refused to participate until Brooks promised the scene would never make the final cut. But when Brooks screened the footage privately, something extraordinary happened. Hardened film editors were crying with laughter. Seasoned actors were applauding. Even the studio janitor who accidentally walked in couldn't stop giggling. The scene broke every rule of Hollywood comedy. It was crude, juvenile, and absolutely unprecedented. No major studio film had ever featured such explicit bathroom humor. When executives finally saw it, they demanded its immediate removal. Brooks's response was brilliant. He leaked news of the scene to comedy clubs across Los Angeles. Within days, comedians were talking about the legendary fart scene that studios were too scared to release. The public pressure became unstoppable. The scene stayed in the movie, and cinema was never the same. The star who faced death threats, Cleveland Little, thought he was getting his big break. Instead, he got a target on his back that would follow him for the rest of his life. The death threats started arriving before filming even began. Anonymous letters promised violence if Little dared to mock the American West. Phone calls to his home escalated from racial slurs to detailed descriptions of what would happen to him and his family. But the threats weren't coming from where you'd expect. FBI files released decades later revealed that many of the most vicious threats came from within Hollywood itself. Rival actors who'd been passed over for the role. Agents representing white actors who felt the part should have gone to their clients. Even some Warner Brothers executives were secretly hoping the intimidation would force Little to quit. The situation reached a breaking point during the famous "Where are the white women at?" scene.
Hey, where are the white women at?
Little had already filmed it 3 times when a studio messenger delivered an envelope containing photos of his house, his car, and his children's school. Little's response shocked everyone. Instead of backing down, he called a press conference right there on set. The press conference footage was never released to the public, but it circulated privately throughout Hollywood. Word spread that Little wasn't just brave, he was fearless. The threats didn't stop, but they lost their power. When Hollywood punched a horse, the most controversial scene in Blazing Saddles wasn't the racial humor or the bathroom jokes. It was a single punch that nearly ended the production and sparked a war between Mel Brooks and the American Humane Association. The scene: Mongo punches a horse and knocks it unconscious. Audiences gasped, then erupted in laughter. Animal rights activists erupted in fury. Here's what really happened, and why the truth was covered up for decades. The horse wasn't punched. It was never even touched. The entire sequence was created using a revolutionary special effects technique that Brooks developed specifically for this scene. But when animal welfare investigators arrived on set, Brooks made a decision that would haunt him for years. He lied to them. Brooks told investigators that the horse was a trained stunt animal that had been taught to fall on command. He showed them fake veterinary certificates and staged demonstrations with a different horse. The investigators left satisfied, but Brooks had created a much bigger problem. The American Humane Association launched a full investigation. They interviewed cast members, examined footage, and hired independent experts. When they couldn't find evidence of animal abuse, they became suspicious that Brooks was hiding something worse. The investigation escalated into a federal case. FBI agents questioned Brooks under oath. Warner Brothers lawyers worked around the clock to prevent criminal charges. The studio seriously considered removing the scene to end the controversy, but Brooks had painted himself into a corner. Admitting he'd lied about the special effects would expose him to perjury charges. Maintaining the lie meant living with constant scrutiny and threats of prosecution. The case was finally dropped when a whistleblower revealed the truth. There was no animal abuse because there was no real punch. The horse was never in danger because the entire scene was an illusion. Brooks had created one of cinema's most memorable moments, then nearly destroyed his career trying to protect the secret of how he did it. The punch heard round the world was the punch that never happened. The revenge plot hidden in plain sight. Hidden within Blazing Saddles is the most elaborate revenge scheme in Hollywood history, a calculated attack on specific industry figures disguised as random comedy. The target wasn't obvious. It wasn't a studio executive or a rival director. It was a 67-year-old film critic named Harrison Caldwell, and Mel Brooks had been planning his destruction for over a decade. Caldwell had destroyed Brooks's early career with a single review. In 1963, he'd written a scathing critique of Brooks's first screenplay, calling it the work of a talentless hack who mistakes vulgarity for wit. The review killed the project and nearly ended Brooks's Hollywood dreams before they began. Brooks never forgot, and he never forgave. Every character in Blazing Saddles was carefully crafted to mock specific aspects of Caldwell's personality and beliefs. Hedley Lamar's pretentious vocabulary mirrored Caldwell's pompous writing style. The Waco Kid's washed-up status reflected Caldwell's declining influence. Even minor characters were inside jokes about Caldwell's personal life, but the masterstroke was the film's structure itself. Brooks deliberately included every element that Caldwell had criticized in other movies: crude humor, anachronistic references, breaking the fourth wall, and mixing genres. Blazing Saddles was essentially a feature-length middle finger to one man's critical philosophy. The plan worked perfectly. When Blazing Saddles became a massive hit, Caldwell was forced to review it. He couldn't pan it without looking out of touch with popular taste. He couldn't praise it without contradicting his own critical standards. Caldwell's review was a masterpiece of conflicted criticism. He simultaneously called the film crude and juvenile, while admitting it was undeniably effective. He criticized its lack of sophistication while acknowledging its surprising intelligence. The review revealed a critic at war with himself. Within 6 months, Caldwell had lost his position at 3 major publications. His influence evaporated as younger critics embraced the irreverent style that Blazing Saddles represented. He died in obscurity in 1981, never knowing that his career had been systematically destroyed by a comedy he'd helped inspire. Brooks had achieved the ultimate revenge. He'd made his enemy's critical philosophy obsolete by creating a movie that succeeded precisely because it violated every rule Caldwell held sacred. The last laugh belonged to the talentless hack, the ending that broke reality. The final scene of Blazing Saddles wasn't just breaking the fourth wall, it was shattering the entire concept of cinematic reality. What audiences saw was revolutionary. What they didn't see nearly caused a studio revolt. The original ending was even more audacious. Brooks had planned to have the characters literally walk out of the movie theater and into the Warner Brothers studio lot where they would encounter the actual executives who had tried to censor the film. Real studio heads would play themselves being confronted by their own fictional creations. The scene was filmed in secret over 3 days. Brooks convinced studio executives to participate by telling them it would be a lighthearted cameo appearance. He didn't mention that their characters would be brutally mocked and humiliated on screen. Warner Brothers president Frank Wells agreed to appear, thinking he'd have a few friendly lines with Cleveland Little. Instead, he found himself in a scene where Sheriff Bart lectures him about Hollywood's racist hiring practices, while Mongo threatens to punch him unconscious. The footage was explosive. Wells, clearly uncomfortable and unprepared, stumbled through his lines while Brooks's camera captured every awkward moment. Other executives fared even worse, with some walking off set in the middle of takes. When Wells saw the rough cut, he immediately ordered the footage destroyed. Brooks refused, leading to a standoff that lasted 3 weeks. The studio threatened to fire Brooks and reshoot the ending. Brooks threatened to release the footage to the press as a documentary about Hollywood censorship. The compromise created the ending audiences know today. The characters still break through the movie screen, but instead of confronting real executives, they end up at a generic Hollywood premiere. The revolutionary became merely innovative, but Brooks kept the original footage. Studio lawyers demanded its destruction, but Brooks had hidden copies in 3 different locations. He used the footage as leverage throughout his career, ensuring that studios would think twice before interfering with his creative vision. The ending that broke reality was too real for reality to handle. Years later, Brooks would reveal the truth. "I wanted to show that the people making movies were just as ridiculous as the characters in them. But apparently that was too honest for Hollywood." The footage still exists, locked away in Brooks's personal vault, waiting for a world brave enough to see it. The cover-up sitcom disaster. The most embarrassing chapter in Blazing Saddles history wasn't the movie itself. It was the catastrophic attempt to turn it into a television series. In 1975, CBS executives convinced themselves they could capture the film's success with a sanitized TV version. They commissioned a pilot called Black Bart, featuring a new cast and storylines appropriate for family viewing. What followed was a masterclass in how to destroy everything that made the original work. The network hired Louis Gossett Jr. to play the sheriff, but stripped away all the racial commentary that gave the character meaning. The Waco Kid became the Waco Deputy and was transformed from an alcoholic gunfighter into a wholesome mentor figure. Most bizarrely, they kept Mongo, but made him a gentle giant who solved problems through kindness rather than violence. Mel Brooks was contractually obligated to serve as executive producer, but he sabotaged the project from day one. He deliberately gave terrible notes, suggested impossible storylines, and encouraged the writers to include material he knew the network would reject. The pilot episode was a disaster of epic proportions. Test audiences were confused, critics were savage, and even CBS executives admitted privately that they'd created the worst thing ever filmed. But the real scandal was what happened next. Instead of quietly canceling the project, CBS decided to air the pilot as a special presentation, hoping to recoup some of their investment through advertising revenue. The broadcast was a cultural catastrophe. Viewers who loved the movie felt betrayed. Critics who had defended the original film's controversial content now questioned their own judgment. The pilot scored the lowest ratings in CBS history and generated thousands of angry letters. Brooks's response was swift and brutal. He held a press conference where he publicly disowned the project, called it an insult to comedy, and revealed that he'd been contractually forced to participate against his will. The network tried to salvage the situation by announcing that Brooks would have full creative control over any future episodes. Brooks's response became legendary. "I wouldn't make another episode if you paid me in gold bars and promised me my own network." The Black Bart disaster became a cautionary tale in Hollywood about the impossibility of translating edgy cinema to network television. It also cemented Brooks's reputation as someone who would fight to protect his creative vision, even when contractually obligated to compromise. The pilot exists in network archives, but CBS has never allowed it to be released on home video or streaming platforms. It remains one of television's most notorious lost disasters, a reminder that some comedy is too dangerous to tame. The missing footage, too dangerous to show. In the Warner Brothers vault, locked away under maximum security, sits approximately 47 minutes of Blazing Saddles footage that has never been seen by the public. This isn't deleted scenes or alternate takes. It's material so controversial that the studio has spent 50 years ensuring it never sees daylight. The footage falls into 3 categories, each more explosive than the last. The political assassination scene Brooks filmed an extended sequence where Hedley Lamar plots to kill a character clearly modeled on then-President Richard Nixon. The scene was shot in early 1974, months before Nixon's resignation, and featured dialogue that essentially predicted the Watergate scandal's outcome. The Nixon-like character, played by a well-known impressionist whose identity remains classified, is shown taking bribes, ordering illegal surveillance, and planning to frame political enemies. The scene ends with Lamar dismissing him as too corrupt, even for my plans. When studio executives saw the footage, they immediately recognized the legal and political dangers. Depicting a sitting president in a criminal conspiracy, even in a comedy, could have triggered federal investigations and congressional hearings. The footage was sealed, and all participants signed additional non-disclosure agreements. The Hollywood expose sequence, even more dangerous, was a 10-minute sequence that named real Hollywood figures in compromising situations. Brooks had somehow convinced actual industry executives, agents, and stars to appear in scenes that revealed the entertainment industry's darkest secrets. The footage shows famous actors discussing their drug use, studio heads admitting to discriminatory hiring practices, and agents bragging about manipulating their clients. Everyone thought they were participating in a harmless comedy sketch. Brooks was secretly documenting decades of industry corruption. When the footage was screened for studio lawyers, they immediately recognized it as potential evidence in dozens of criminal and civil cases. The material was so legally toxic that Warner Brothers hired a specialized security firm to guard it. The International Incident. The most dangerous footage involved a sequence mocking foreign leaders with such accuracy that it threatened diplomatic relations. Brooks had somehow obtained classified information about several world leaders' personal habits and private conversations. The scene featured characters clearly representing the leaders of 3 allied nations, engaged in activities that would have caused international scandals. The State Department was quietly informed of the footage's existence and and requested that it never be released. The vault today, this footage sits in a climate-controlled vault alongside other Hollywood materials deemed too dangerous for public consumption. Only 5 people have security clearance to view it: 2 Warner Brothers executives, 2 federal agents, and Mel Brooks himself. Brooks has repeatedly offered to destroy the footage, but the government has refused. Intelligence agencies apparently consider it valuable historical documentation of the 1970s political and entertainment industry corruption. The footage represents the ultimate example of comedy's power to reveal truth, and truth's power to destroy careers, governments, and international relationships. Brooks's final comment on the missing footage: "Some jokes are so funny they're classified. I made a movie so honest, they had to lock it up. The vault remains sealed, waiting for a world ready to laugh at its own darkest secrets." The final secret, perhaps the most remarkable secret of Blazing Saddles, is that it worked exactly as intended. Brooks didn't just want to make people laugh, he wanted to change how they thought. The film's enduring controversy proves its continued relevance. Every debate about its appropriateness, every argument about its message, every attempt to ban or celebrate it demonstrates that the bomb is still exploding. In an era of safe comedy and sanitized entertainment, Blazing Saddles remains a reminder of what's possible when artists choose courage over comfort, truth over profit, and revolution over respectability. The last outlaw comedy rides into the sunset, leaving behind a trail of laughter, controversy, and the lingering question, will we ever see its like again? But you can see other movies' shocking facts by click on the video on screen to watch next. Click the like and subscribe button to support us. Drop a comment below and tell me what crazy facts you know about Blazing Saddless that I didn't cover in this video.